Hi, I'm Diana Giselle Yanez, host of Highly Sensitive Money. I'm a money coach, certified financial planner, and a highly sensitive person who brings money and social justice together. If you're someone who feels deeply, can endlessly think through how one decision affects everything else, or has ever struggled with all the things that traditional financial thinking leaves out, you're in the right place. In this show, I chat with highly sensitive people on how they handle their money and with money experts on how they cultivate social justice in their work. Questions? Please go to allthecolors.net and schedule a free 30-minute call. And I'm happy to share resources on investment management, money coaching, workshops, or anything else money and social justice related. Join us in this episode as we explore money and sensitivity while honoring that all of our well-being is interconnected. In today's episode, I'm exploring 5 core ways we interact with money: how we earn, spend, save, give, and invest. And I'm asking, what would it look like to align each of those with your values, especially around social justice and care for the earth? I share some of the questions I've been sitting with lately. What does it mean to truly live in an interconnected world? How do our financial choices reflect or resist systems of harm? And where can we make small, meaningful shifts, micro actions that add up to real change? Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Today's episode is going to be a solo, and it'll be talking about how can we earn, save, spend, give, and invest in ways where our money actually does good. This is based on an article I wrote called The Interconnected Dollar, Aligning Your Money with Social Justice and Environmental Care. And the main premise is that you can make your money do good things. Money is always living out our values, whether we think this through consciously or not. And the way we earn, spend, save, invest, and gift lets us know what we prioritize. Sometimes our actions just speak so much louder than words. And today I'll dive into how these values of social justice and environmental care can be lived out in each of these 5 different parts of our money, these 5 ways that we interact with it. First off, I want to start with, let's just define, where are we, right? Like, what do I mean by the word social justice? And what do I mean by environmental care? For both of them, interconnectedness, interdependence is really important. For those of you who are identify as highly sensitive, one of the key parts of this definition of this way of being is really your sense of porousness, how much other people's way of being or well-being affects us, right? So we can be very porous, and I've learned over time like how to separate myself, how to create more distance, and it is still not my default. And the beautiful side of that porousness is really seeing a need, taking care of a need. And I love, this is kind of like an esoteric description, totally. Like, I am really into spirituality, and you can tell by the quotes that I pick. But this quote is from Martin Luther King. And I first heard it when I was in Atlanta. I was at one of the museums for him. I don't remember what the museum was called. I mean, I had gone to his house, had done the tour, and now being at the museum. And he says, in a real sense, all life is interrelated. All men are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. This was written in the 60s. And when I read this for the first time, it made me think of my psychedelic trips, because that was one of the big gifts that I came away from psychedelics, of just like how interconnected we are. And as a person who's highly sensitive, I've always felt that. But psychedelics helped me really bring it to the forefront and see like how much our well-being is really tied together. And I feel like I'm repeating the same words. One of the things I'm remembering too is maybe a big part where society has changed is when we stopped considering ourselves to be part of nature. And because in many indigenous communities, many communities outside of the West, and also in the West, also in European countries, but like, we are a part of nature. We're not above it, right? And us caring for nature will allow us to care for ourselves. Like there's really, if you're hungry and I have food, all I want to do is feed you. And that is such a normal way of being. And yet capitalism, this myth of scarcity, has made it so that we think we can only take care of ourselves and everybody else is out on their own. I'm reading a book called The Dawn of Everything by David Graeber and David Wangro. And they are really focusing on like, what is the root of inequality? How did we get to the current unequal state of being that we have, right? Where like the 1% owns so much compared to the rest of us. And myself as like a person who grew up, who was born into a country of empire, I've had a lot of benefit from that, right? And like I know it because my cousins were born in a country that does not have an empire. Although Mexico is really strong economically for the most part. And how did we get here? Right? That's what that book is about. And I want to bring it in a little bit because I'm at the beginning stages of the book and I've read it before, but I'm just like going back to it again because it's so mind-blowing. And what I understand is that they're talking about what indigenous communities in the Americas were like before, and that idea of like he's hungry, I have food, let me feed him really really was central to them. And there was a lot of criticism of how savage Europeans were, how savage they were, and like having so much poverty. Like, what is it what has to happen inside of a person to see someone suffer and not immediately want to support them or help them? Right. And I think sometimes all of us are just taught to numb. We're taught to be like, yeah, well, I'm so busy. I got to take care of myself because if I try to help them, they're all going to sink me down. And that's also something I've heard, that if you give someone support, then they'll just bleed you dry. And then, and maybe it's true because of how many centuries we've had of these relationships, but I don't think that it's always been the way of humans. I think there is a way for humans to live with each other where mutual care is the norm. And in this quote by Martin Luther King, he's saying that even if it isn't the norm, that's the reality. That if someone is being oppressed, we're all being oppressed through that, because the world creation is so much fuller when each of us actually gets to express our entirety, right? And it doesn't mean that my entirety is always great. Like I make mistakes constantly. And I'm with people who will respond to those mistakes and let me know, like, hey, out of line, or hey, can we talk about this? Or hey, this is how it impacted me. And, but they're not asking me to dim, right? They're not asking me to like dim my light, make myself smaller for them to be doing well. So I hope that people are following what I'm putting down, because there's just like when I hear the term our interconnected way of being, I just think of so many ways that we pretend that that's not true, that we pretend that others' well-being doesn't affect us. And maybe this isn't the case for everyone, but I know for myself and my personal experience that it is really upsetting to be born on a planet that can grow its own food and to know that people don't have access to it routinely. And in my family, there was always the work of like, there were the undeserving poor, the people who were poor, who were not deserving of help because they weren't like doing everything they could to make things better for themselves. And I don't buy into that. I don't buy into that. I have a lot very internalized of like, well, they should pick it up themselves, right? They need to hustle in the system. And I'm like, well, the system is messed up. The system is not allowing us to really be fully ourselves. Like there are so many other ways where we could be organizing this. And that's what I'm getting from the book, The Dawn of All Things. Coming back to the topic of interconnectedness. So I start off the article with this quote by Martin Luther King. I go into a quote by Lila Watson, who actually, it wasn't just by her, it was with her and a community of people. And that quote is, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come here because your well being is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And again, that speaks to there's no one that's above or below. There's no saviorism. We are all people figuring it out as we go. And some people may have access to more power, But there have been societies, there have been times where no one has had access to more power. Each of us has been individually able and free to make our own decisions. And I know that's not the society we live in today, but it's nice to know that they existed at some point, that humans have been able to organize ourselves in so many different ways. So I see social justice as anything that moves us toward freedom and care for all. This understanding of interconnectedness applies just as much to our world, to our relationship with the natural world. And Joanna Macy has recently passed away. I'm recording this in late July, and I think it was within this past week. Joanna Macy was an environmentalist and a Buddhist who created the network, the work that reconnects. And it really is about the grief. Like, how do we hold the grief that people are having as they see the natural world be negatively impacted by humans? And also the lack of will to change that in the human sphere, because I think that is also so heartbreaking that we know that we could be doing things differently and we're not. It just makes me think so much of addiction. Like, this isn't working and you're still doing it. For listeners who identify as highly sensitive, we all know how quickly nature can impact us. That's also often one of the recommendations. If you're highly sensitive and you're feeling burnt out, go take a walk in nature, go hug a tree, go stand by some butterflies, pet your dog. I mean, my little dog is a constant source of nervous system regulation, and including nature's well-being within not just human, right? Like, it's hard enough for us to expand well-being to think of all our brothers and sisters, but then to also include all of the species, all of the plant life, all of the mineral life. Like, all of these things are here and they're real, and our dollars can really take that into consideration too. So I'm going to start to dive into what can we do. And my article, I really focus on micro actions, because when we're thinking of systems change, like our one individual change can feel like it's nothing, right? Like, what's the point? We're just a drop of water in the ocean. But the ocean is made up of drop of waters. And us preemptively giving away our power, us preemptively saying, like, there's nothing I can do, really just gets us stuck in the status quo. These micro actions can help us move in the direction that we want the world to be in, and that'll also empower us. It starts to create some like upward momentum of how can I make changes. The easiest place to start is, where do you spend? When you spend money, can you see if it's fair trade? For example, your chocolate, your coffee. When you go buy furniture, can you buy furniture that's long lasting, that doesn't have built in obsolescence? When you are buying clothing, can you look into buying used clothing, right? So that it has a second life. Can we look to share things? Can we look to, I mean, I wish that all of my friends lived in my apartment building and then we could just share each other's like washing machine and vacuum cleaners and like all of these things. Like, why does every family need to have their own washing machine? You don't, right? You can go to the laundromat. So there are options where you could like rent things. I mean, maybe you can rent more things. I know that I have not had a car since 2019. As a Southern California native, I never thought that I could even like be an adult without a car. But not having a car has been fueled financially, but also environmentally. Like, I can walk. I picked a city that's very walkable. I move around on a bicycle, and I don't really need a car here, right? This was when I was thinking of like, where do I want to live? It's like, how can I minimize my carbon footprint? And everybody's got different life situations. Everybody has a different set of choices that they can make, but think through. Like, and I don't have I don't want to have like an exhaustive list of all the things you can do, because just like with health, most of us know like, hey, maybe you should quit smoking and eat more veggies. Like, those are the kind of things that I'm thinking about with micro actions. What is a micro action that you can take on the spending side of things so that you are aligning with social justice and environmental care? That's on the spending. The next one that is pretty easy too is giving. Are you giving to causes? Are you giving to people? Are you remembering the joy of giving? I wrote an article ages ago. This was probably like in 2015, 2016, almost a decade ago, about the benefit of giving. And research was showing that you could spend money on all kinds of things, and within a couple of months, you'd like forget. But if you gave money to either a cause that you were excited about or a person, then it made it easier to like it changed your self concept into someone that was generous and interconnected, and you also felt held by community. There's something about giving help that makes us feel more comfortable asking for help. So, giving in a way is saying the world is abundant and is here for you and is supportive, even though you're not receiving anything. Just like the act of you giving actually makes that happen in your brain, or at least that's how I feel it for myself. Giving has been a part of when I became an entrepreneur, I actually reduce my giving to like the bare minimum. If I was giving $100 to an organization before, I was now giving five. Like it went down to the bottom, but I didn't want to stop giving because I knew that as an entrepreneur, one day my income was going to be back to where it was before I left corporate America. And honestly, I'm not 100% back to the same income. If you think about how much my income would have increased had I been in corporate America. So I'm not able to give as much as if I had stayed in corporate America financially, but I give a lot in other ways through volunteering, through my accessibility pricing. As many of you might know, my money coaching is really accessibility based. And I'm able to serve people who are on unemployment, and I'm able to serve people who work in the tech industry getting ready for a sabbatical. And it's just that freedom of like everyone is paying 2% of their monthly gross income after credit card debt, high interest credit card debt. It just gives me freedom to, and I don't know. I mean, I think with accessibility pricing, is that really giving? In a way it is. If I was thinking very much like a dollar of my time is worth this much, then if anyone's paying me less, then I'm giving it away. It's actually much more interdependent of I as a person that likes novelty, want to be able to work with many different types of people. And this is a way where I can satisfy that need for myself. And it also feels good to be able to say, I can work with anyone at any price range. I do have a bottom, like the least I charge is $50 for a 50-minute session. That's like the least amount for US citizens. For citizens in countries that are outside of the dominant empire, the rate is different, right? I'll just ask them like, well, what is a masseuse charge in your neighborhood? What is like tell me about the last time you got a massage. How much was that? And that's how much I'll charge. So and there's freedom in being able to give in that way, to give of my time, because in a way it's volunteering, but it's also like the other person is hearing that the service that I provide is worth an exchange from them too. So like the money itself can at lower levels can become more symbolic, which makes it more important. So that's why I don't want to just sometimes I do 100% volunteer, no fees exchanged. But in that way of how I'm actually talking about how I'm earning money at this point, but it's also related to how I give. But since I'm already in the weeds of earning, let me talk about earning. I, as a highly sensitive person, doing work that went against my values was draining. I've actually been very lucky that I've never had to do work that was 100% against my values. When I worked at the packaging company, that felt a little weird because we were making so many plastic based products and we were always shipping things all over the place. So we had a very, very high carbon footprint. And the company treated its people okay, but there was a lot of like window dressing about what was available for employees versus the reality of like the nepotism in corporate America. And I just think corporate America isn't really life inducive, like it doesn't really like at least for me, it didn't light me up with energy. I wasn't super motivated by the projects you were working on. I liked my coworkers. So that helped it feel values aligned. And honestly, that was the main part. I liked my coworkers and I liked earning money, but the mission of the work itself meant that I had to find purpose outside of working, which meant that I was doing a lot of volunteering at the time. So that's been the only time in my life when I was working at that packaging company as a profit analyst where I felt that the way that I was earning wasn't really values aligned. But in other places, I worked at nonprofits, I worked as an associate social worker, I worked even in demography when I was doing county government work. Like that felt like, okay, yeah, we need to know how many people are here. But my current job takes the cake. My current job is so values aligned. It is so joy inducing. And I wish that everyone could find their calling in the way that I have, or that everyone could feel just good about the way that they earn money. Right? Because at the end of the day, like sometimes I think that the fact that I have a calling can make the calling really extractive towards me. Like I end up working more, or I end up like my sense of identity can be really tied up in my work. And I have friends and clients and coworkers whose sense of identity is not tied up as much in work. And I feel like that might actually be more freeing. That actually might be a better way to earn, but still they earn money in ways, many of them earn money in ways that feel good. That they're like, yeah, I like the purpose of what it is. And then I leave it at work. Like I don't bring it with me. And I think a lot of us as entrepreneurs or people who are really mission focused, our work does become our identity. But that's what I'll talk about earning. And I know how complicated it is. I know that corporations often have the highest salaries, the highest wages in a way because people don't want to do that work without like a good amount of return, right? With a remuneration that really like takes into account how painful those jobs can be morally. So just consider, is there, and in the article, I actually talk about like, well, maybe you can make a micro change. There's you can take micro action at your company. For example, adding your pronouns to your email signature. Depending on where you work, that might be a massive, massive action, right? And it's in solidarity with the LGBTQIA plus community. Maybe you can just ask, like, can we fly a little less so that we're using less fossil fuels? Like, what are tiny things that you can do where you already are? Just change your direction a little bit. There's this metaphor by Martha Beck, and I'm taking the Martha Beck Wayfinder coaching, life coaching training right now. So I'm using a lot of her. I'm like really immersed in her and her thought work. And she's a life coach. She's also a sociologist, and she has this really beautiful metaphor in her book, The Way of Integrity, where she says when a plane is flying somewhere, it's a really long distance, and it's actually making tiny, tiny changes, like 1 degree changes. And because it's such a long distance, it makes a huge impact. So in your life, is there a 1 degree turn, like a tiny turn that you can take that is within your window of comfort, that doing it doesn't like make you lose sleep or make you worry about your livelihood or make you like it's just like a tiny change in the direction that you want to go. And over the long term, that tiny change is going to take you completely somewhere completely different. Like we don't know how adding change to our lives, like how many other things that could touch. So for those of you who have less flexibility in how they earn money, you always have choices. One thing I learned in Al Anon, we always have choices. There is no one putting a gun to our head and telling us this is the thing that you have to do. Maybe there is sometimes, but for the most part, if you're listening to this podcast, I imagine that no one's putting a gun to your head on the regular and being like, you have no choices. You have to do this. No, that's our internalized fear. And if you want to talk it through, we can always have a free 30-minute call on why you feel that you are putting a gun to your head and not allowing yourself any changes in your money life. So we've talked about spending, giving, earning. Let's talk about saving. So, saving, when we save our money at a bank in the US, for every dollar that we save, the bank is able to loan out 9 because there is a 10% Federal Reserve requirement. And if you are banking at what are so called the dirty dozen banks, And you can find the link to this on my podcast. I'll link it to the podcast, The Dirty Dozen Banks, but I'll also link it to the article where I dive more into like what does this mean? How do they measure it? But these are the banks that are doing fossil fuel financing, fossil fuel exploration, fossil fuel, anything related to fossil fuel, the Dirty Dozen banks. And a lot of these banks will say like they'll have movements of like, yeah, we're going to be net zero, which means that they're both investing in renewables and they're investing in fossil fuels. And overall, it nets out to zero, but they're still investing in fossil fuels. Like, we actually want something cleaner than that. So, by moving your money to a bank that is saying no to fossil fuels, you're actually taking $10. Yeah, like you're taking 10 times that amount. If you have $100 at the bank, you're taking $1,000 from fossil fuel expiration. It's really, really impactful. And I know it's a pain. I know it's a hassle to change banks. In the long run, though, it makes a lot of sense. I know I started banking at a credit union in 2008. I was working at Merrill Lynch, and Merrill Lynch was bought out by Bank of America. And I was like, all of you are disgusting. I am not going to have anything to do with you big banks. And I've been able to do that. And I'm in the process right now of like moving, even like really cleaning up fossil fuel wise my own banking out of other, like, because I have an online bank that I was researching, and I was like, this is not as clean as I want it to be. So I know the amount of work it takes, and it's worth doing. So that's the banking. And the last thing is investing. So full on promotion, self promotion here, but I am an investment advisor that focus on social justice and environmental care. And it feels so good to know that the way that I earn money is directly related to social justice and environmental care in an industry that is not known for either of those things. So bringing lightness and goodness and integrity to investing is a big job and one that I'm happy to do. And how can you invest in a way that's aligned with social justice and environmental care? One of my favorite resources, I'm going to mention two. One of the tools I want to talk about is Natural Investments Heart Rating. And it looks at three main sections. And again, the resources for this are going to be in the show notes. You can also go to the article where I go more in depth into this and I share a lot of links. And first, they look at ESG screening. That's environmental sustainability and governance screening. So they see, does the firm, does the ETF, does the mutual fund actually screen out for these things? Is this a focus of what they're doing? Shareholder advocacy. Is the mutual fund ETF engaged in advocacy? Are they trying to tell firms, like, are they talking to these big box offices and telling them, like, hey, can we move away from fossil fuels? What are your gender guidelines? Those kind of things. And then the last one is community investing. Are they bringing investments to the community? You can read more about the criteria and the methodology for this. There's about 287 companies. I just looked it up. There's 287 companies or ETFs and mutual funds that are rated. That's an amazing resource. There's also another resource called As You Sow or Invest Your Values. Invest Your Values can be a really good place to go and see, like, what am I invested in? Like, my retirement account has this random target date fund. Is that target date fund aligned with who I want to be or not? Now, for investing, this is a bigger conversation. I'm going to have a couple of different podcasts and articles focused on investing and like how can you actually go through and screen for your investing. So today is a little bit more of a preview, but I just want to remind you that it is possible for your investments to be values aligned in both social justice and social issues and in environmental issues. But sometimes it's just philanthropy. Like sometimes we're like, well, how could I just interviewed Leo. I think Leo's episode is coming out this month. And how could I make a profit helping trans communities? Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you just like have to straight up give money, right? So like investing can be a really good way to live out our values, but know that it's not the only way. So that in summary is the 5 different ways that we use money and how we can do good in each of these areas. I would love to hear from people. Out of these 5 different ways that we interact with money, what is a change that you'd like to do in each of them? What is a micro action? And a micro action could be as small as I'm going to see what I'm invested in. I will not change anything. I will just see. I'll just see how much fossil fuel exposure I have. I'll see what the how investor values rates the ETFs and mutual funds that I'm in. Like just see. Like that gaining information, that is really big. For banking, you might say, I'm going to see if my bank is on the dirty dozen list. It's pre-contemplative, no action needed. You're just kind of like, let me see what's there. Let me see how I feel about my bank using their money for fossil fuel exploration. The next one I talked about was earning, right? And I talked about like adding your pronouns. I talked about just like what is available at the place that you work. Where is a change? Where is there a policy that they already have in place that maybe you can push a little further ahead? And we need people working in corporations to be internal activists, right? To be activists from the inside. And then we also need people to be activists from the outside. And wherever you are, just like pick up what you can to make things, to move things in in a better direction for the planet and for humanity. Giving, I think we maybe you can give an extra $2. Like maybe you can. One of the other guests that I've had this month is Miriam Soyla Perez, and she says that she always has a set amount with her. She always has cash, and that she's able to, she just gives it. They see a need, they fill a need, right? That simple way of being that's really just responding creatively to each moment. And then spending. Maybe you can start to shop at a co op more often. Maybe you can postpone buying fast fashion. Maybe you can talk to somebody about it, right? So, another part of being an activist is like we do want to tell people. At the same time, what I'm most always interested in is like, what can you, as a person who is interested in this, who is activated in this, actually do? Like focusing on ourselves and the micro actions that we can take as we are changing the world one moment at a time. I'm also thinking of Joanna Macy, who recently passed. I Years ago I listened to an interview of hers where she was saying we are at a turning point, but there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee that something's going to happen and we're going to be saved. And there's no guarantee that it's all going to fall apart. We're just living in that really big uncertainty and that really big ambivalence of what is happening next. Can we have a change of consciousness? I also want to make a plug for the podcast Accidental Gods with Manda Scott. I've been listening to that for the past 6 months, 7 months, and it's been so helpful to hear what systems level thinkers are working on. And she's exposed me to bigger ideas. Sometimes it can be really overwhelming to hear how far gone we are and like what the planet can actually, how the planet can actually like sustain all 8 billion of us and how little we're doing to really be in right relationship with the environment and with each other. And at the end of the day, if you're not really taking stock of where you're standing, if we as a species are not taking stock of the impact that we're having on the environment and on each other, we're not going to be able to make any changes. So that is like just a little bonus suggestion that I have out there of like, get more informed. Thank you so much for today. Our money is never neutral. It's always expressing something about what we value, who we care about, and the kind of world we believe is possible. Whether it's spending with more intention, choosing where we bank, or simply pausing to notice what brings us joy and giving, each small act carries weight. We don't have to overhaul everything overnight. Take it easy. A 1-degree shift, just a small reorientation in how we relate to our finances can ripple outward over time. The important thing is to continue the shift and to not give up in despondency and say, it's all it's all not working. There's nothing I can do. We get to stay. We get to stay in the conversation and the struggle and the hope. Thank you for joining me on Highly Sensitive Money. I'm Diana Giselle Yanez, and I hope this episode helped you see how money and sensitivity can work together while honoring our interconnected well-being. We have the power to create a system where everyone's needs are met because nature is abundant. If you found value in today's conversation, please take a moment to leave a review and share this episode with someone who could benefit. Your support helps this message reach more people navigating their own financial journeys. A thank you goes to Mike Schul for the music and Juan Antonio Nunez for producing. For more resources on bringing money and social justice together, sign up for my monthly newsletter over at allthecolors.net. I also invite you to schedule a free 30-minute call where we can talk about money coaching, investment management, and all things money and social justice. Until next time, remember that your sensitivity and deep thinking is your superpower.